This fight at a local high school escalated into a deadly stabbing right there in the cafeteria.
It left one 17-year-old dead. Another student life-flighted to Memorial Hermann Hospital.
A popular high school football player allegedly opening fire in the cafeteria.
Where does the word zero tolerance come from? Zero tolerance received significant national attention when a program was developed in 1986 by Peter Nunez, an attorney in San Diego, which required seizure and legal custody of any seagoing vessels which carried any amount of drugs or narcotics. How did zero tolerance take its place in the education area? Starting in 1989, educational institutes in California, New York, and Kentucky provided for mandatory expulsion for drugs, fighting, and gang-related activity. By 1993, zero-tolerance policies were adopted across the country, and these were further broadened to include not only drugs and weapons, but also smoking, violence, and any other activity that caused harm or damage to the school or the students. This sideswept zero-tolerance into national policy when the Clinton administration signed the Gun-Free Schools Act of 1994 into law. The law mandates a one-year calendar expulsion for possession of a firearm, referral of law-violating students to the criminal or juvenile justice system, and the provision that state law must authorize the chief administrative officer of each local school district to modify such expulsions on a case-by-case basis. Originally, the bill covered only firearms, but more recent amendments have broadened the language of the bill to include any instrument that may be used as a weapon. Local school districts have broadened the mandate of zero tolerance beyond the federal mandates of weapons to drugs and alcohol, fighting, threats, or swearing.
Good evening, everyone. The reaction of so many people today was, oh no, not again. Another high school, Columbine High in Littleton, Colorado, this time on the edge of Denver. It has been a horror. The spokesman for the local sheriff's office speaks of as many as 25 fatalities inside the school, the gunman, fellow students who rushed the school and opened fire for reasons we do not know yet, for reasons we may never know.
On April 21st, 1999, Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold killed 13 people and injured 23 others before killing themselves on the campus of Columbine High School in Littleton, Colorado. Although school shootings have occurred throughout United States history, the Columbine Massacre had a greater impact than those of the past. Besides the number of victims, which was a cause for panic and disturbance, the public was also more engaged than in prior attacks. This engagement can be attributed to the media attention of the event. Prior to the Columbine Massacre, no school shooting had been televised live. David Cullen, the author of Columbine, argued that this live coverage created a new sense of fear and outrage, which sparked an obsessive curiosity in the society. For months after the incident, Columbine remained one of the hottest issues and was constantly present in the media. This exposure to the brutal massacre impacted the American public and markedly changed their perspectives of school safety. 1 year after Columbine, a Pew Research Center poll showed that 71% of parents felt that the Columbine shooting had changed their view of how safe their child was at school. Fewer than half, 40%, of parents regard their child as very safe at the school, and 50% describe their child as only somewhat safe. In the same survey, participants were asked about their main concerns in dealing with school violence prevention. The poll asked, in the end, who is mostly responsible for ensuring that children don't commit violent acts at school? Is it mostly the school's responsibility or mostly the parents' responsibility? Even though 85% of participants argued that parents are responsible, as opposed to the 9% that believed the school is responsible, the participants focused on school-controlled preventative strategies. Only 6% believed that stricter gun control would be the most efficient solution. 11% believed that school security should increase with additions such as metal detectors and more security guards, and 60% of the participants believed that the most effective strategy was to pay more attention to kids' antisocial attitudes and behaviors. These solutions feed directly into the zero-tolerance ideas, which aim to remove the threat of school violence by identifying possible attackers and eliminate any weapons before it is used.
NASP says that administrators perceive zero-tolerance policies as fast-acting interventions that send a clear, consistent message that certain behaviors are not acceptable in the school. Richard Aram and Dorit Priest highlight the point that consistency is key. The two argue that a more disciplined classroom creates not only a safer environment, but a more predictable and reliable one, where students are open to new ideas and experiences. The zero tolerance policy was enacted in 1994 when juvenile crime rate was at its peak, and after such, juvenile crime rate steadily decreased. Many believe that because of this statistic, the zero tolerance policy is responsible for the decline. According to the Veris brief on the zero tolerance policy, research does show that over the past 2 decades, youth crime has become less serious and violent. Additionally, a survey collected by the Center for Disease Control and Prevention showed just a decline in the proportion of students who claimed to have brought a weapon to school in the previous 30 days, 17% in 2011, down from 22% in 1993. However, this policy is costly, with the number of full-time law enforcement tripling in the last 20 years. Some believe that this is also creating a prison-like environment instead of a school-like one. Lucen and Martinez from the Civil Rights Project state that, in recent years, an estimated 2 million students annually are suspended from secondary schools. Although zero-tolerance policies were created to respond to students caught with a weapon, only 5% out of 433,800 serious disciplinary actions taken by public schools during the 2009-2010 school year involved possession of a weapon. 265,100 of these actions were in response to fights. So what about the rest of these incidents? They are stories like these. Josh Welch, a second grader from Baltimore, Maryland, was eating a Pop-Tart in school one day and tried to make it into the shape of a mountain. By mistake, the pastry instead resembled a gun, so Josh was suspended for 2 days. Another example of the extreme of zero-tolerance policy was the kindergartner from Mount Carmel, Pennsylvania, who was originally suspended for 10 days for threatening to shoot her friend with bubbles from a bubble gun. This was taken as a terroristic threat. Despite the controversy over the zero-tolerance policy, there is no evidence to prove that harsh punishment discourages students from bringing weapons to school. As incidents of school violence continue to surface, school officials and policymakers are still searching for effective strategies to prevent and handle school violence. There are both pros and cons to the zero-tolerance policy, thus it is important to analyze both sides of the argument in order to determine the effectiveness of zero-tolerance principles and work towards creating safer schools.
Moms and dads and hunters and sportsmen and clergy and local officials, like the mayors who are here today, standing up and saying, this time really is different. That we're not just going to sit back and wait until the next Newtown or the next Blacksburg or the next innocent, beautiful child is gunned down in a playground in Chicago or Philadelphia or Los Angeles. None of these ideas should be controversial.